Been hit, and we are live on YouTube.
All right, welcome everybody. House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. On Thursday, May 15th, we are here with the Agency of Digital Services and Secretary Riley Hughes to learn a little bit more about the state of Vermont data sharing and sales. We'll go around the room and introduce ourselves, including our committee member joining us online. And then we will ask our guests to introduce themselves as well. I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Richard Bailey, Lomoil 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rowland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Klepner, Chittenden 13, Burlington, and apologies to everyone that I need to leave at 11:25.
Laura Sibilia, Wyndham 2.
Scott Campbell, representative from St. Johnsbury.
Great. Jack.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Super. And joining us in the room.
John Kelly, ADS Chief of Staff.
Great. And our Senate colleagues.
Rob Plunkett, Bennington Senate District.
Wendy Harrison, Wyndham District.
Joe Major, Windsor District.
Great. All right. Did we get everybody? I think we did. Thanks everybody for being here. Secretary Riley Hughes, thanks for joining us. We are continuing to learn about the state of Vermont government sharing and data sales. So over to you.
Perfect. So for the record, Denise Riley Hughes, Secretary for the Agency of Digital Services, State CIO. I'm pulling up the questions that you had sent over to make sure that I stay on track.
Great.
When we last spoke, I believe that you've had a couple of testimonies regarding DMV, and I had an opportunity to have a testimony with Senate institutions regarding 458. And some of the questions we discussed were around the additional language that included an ask for a report and definitions around data. And Madam Chair, where would you like me to start with?
Why don't we start with that? So, yeah, we had in the course of we've been on a little bit of a circuitous journey with this topic, but in the course of testimony that we took from NCSL or somebody from Oregon, sorry about that, I'm having a moment. We learned, some of us for the first time, including me, that some states share or sell data as a revenue source, and that they use that to then fund state IT systems. So since that was a new topic for us, we wanted to learn more about it. Some of our members, led by Rep. Southworth and Rep. Sibilia, developed some language that we had hoped could be maybe inserted into H458 on the Senate side, so that we could get a report on that and continue to learn about the extent to which the state of Vermont sells Vermonters data. And so we brought that to the Senate committee, asked if they might consider including it. We wanted to get your feedback on that idea, on the language in the report, what you think ADS could do or not do. And then when we're done with that discussion, everybody, of course, you guys too, welcome to ask questions. I did want to start kind of parsing through a little bit. We heard testimony from DMV that I've still got more questions on. I don't feel that I have clarity, actually. So we're just trying to wrap our hands around the topic, I think. Yep, Rep. Sibilia.
Yeah, I would just add that this committee yesterday heard testimony from Norwich that was incredibly alarming around the urgency of protecting people's data. Mm-hmm. And I will speak for myself in saying that really, really is making me feel like failure to act with urgency is a pretty big drop in our responsibility. So I know that this is an issue that's really important to you, Madam Secretary, but we are really behind here.
Yep.
So excuse me, Madam Chair, I just want to add the context that we had that presentation yesterday, which was alarming and adds further urgency, at least for me, that
Thank you.
Data protection.
It was a good training. And I had sent that info along to Chair Harrison as well.
Okay. So I haven't reviewed that, but
I just
was
did
it
yesterday.
Okay, good. Was it the town of Norwich?
No.
Or was it the company?
Yeah,
Okay.
Norwich University has,
Oh, about the
grant money.
training. Okay.
yeah, and
Right.
they have founded, the
Information. warfare.
Center for
Applied Research
Apply-
Institute.
Thank you, the Applied Research Institute. And they offer a 3-hour training called AI, Cybersecurity and Information Warfare for Policymakers. And we took it yesterday and it was fabulous. And it's 3 1-hour modules and they kind of build on each other. And then you go into executive session for the information warfare module. And we just took it yesterday and it was really eye-opening and very useful especially for those of us on the committee who are new to these topics.
Okay. Yes, we will certainly do that. But in the meantime, I am really concerned about all sorts of data privacy issues, and especially concerned if the state is providing data or selling data that is in a way that the public doesn't know. I mean, we're a government, so we ought to protect data
Yes.
more than the private sector. I think we have an obligation to our residents and our customers.
So I think we should tackle that first.
I was going to say, why don't we switch the order of operations? So Secretary Riley Hughes, maybe you can give us a high level overview of, data sales.
Perfect.
Do you have written testimony or should I take notes?
I don't.
Okay, I'm going to take notes. I don't want that to be distracting.
I can, yes.
Okay.
The web portal board, I believe the conversation around the web portal board is what sparked some of this conversation.
Yeah.
And there was shared information. I shared with you that there is a small amount of revenue that comes to the state when it comes to selling data is the simplest way in which we state that. Out of the $3.6 million, it is less than 2% of that number that comes from 2 processes that are actually required by law. So there's 2 places where ADS has contracting for technology, but not contracting for data sales with our web hosting organization. The first area is driver history records, which is a federal law called the Driver Privacy Protection Act, or DIPA, DPPA. That is a federal law that requires that information to be provided to subscribed parties, and that is done with DMV. These are public records. These are not private personal records. And there is a form that DMV has. It's available online. We can send the link to the committees if you are interested in reading it, where that disclosure is put in place. I believe that when the commissioner came in, he talked about their desire to tighten up the language around third-party access to that data down the line. But for all intents and purposes, this is public record data. This is not personal, restricted, confidential data. These are things that are under state law designated as public record and under federal law required.
Can I walk back through that? Because I feel like I'm remembering now how the testimony flowed. So DMV obviously is hosted on Vermont.gov. So that's where all these driver records live at the DMV. And Tyler and we're required through DIPA to report or give or turn over driver record data. And that's used by insurance companies. And that it flows through Tyler Tech because they're the web host.
Facilitator for us. Yes.
Yeah. And so Tyler, percentage of that is like their cut. I'm imagining like a little handling fee. Okay. And so Tyler Tech then turns that company over to the insurance brokers.
They take the data that is authorized through the state and they provide it to that subscriber list of organizations that would be on the receiving end. So these are DPPA authorized organizations, and they are the recipients of the data. DMV does have a process that if it is not facilitated through the web portal, through automation, that they do intake requests for that information as well. And so DMV does directly provide that information and the same rate fee applies.
Okay, and I think I'm remembering now, things do come back to me, that where we lose control of the data is that the DPPP authorized organizations like the insurance brokers or whatever, they could turn around and sell that data.
There is nothing preventing them from selling that data either through the agreements or through public records law in the state of Vermont.
Is that something we could take action on to say like it can't be, that's the end of the line? Is that,
If under the federal law requirements that contract says you can't do this with the data and they sign the contract, I'm not a lawyer, so we would just need to have legal verification that for those organizations, they would be upheld and the AG's office would have to get involved. But also keep in mind, those are public records. So anybody can access and request those public records.
but not in bulk, right?
They can access, it's public records law in Vermont.
That's right. Okay, we did talk about that. Rep. Kleppner?
Yeah, I think that was exactly our concern, that it's much easier to buy the whole list aggregated than just to access it as public records one at a time and create your own list. And
Or you can request the entire list yourself as part of that and pay the fee that is associated on the request type.
That's right. Okay. Is that your hand or are you emoting?
I'm emoting.
Okay. Sorry. Yes, Senator Harrison.
Thank you. So are there specific fields that need to be produced to comply with the regulation?
The form, as I've viewed it, sets of information that do include name, address, driver history, record information. So yes.
So it is specified. I mean, it's defined. So I would just like to have that list, the
Yes, we can send
specification.
that link.
And then the subscribers list, can anyone become a subscriber, or is that limited somehow?
My understanding is that the subscribers managed through we're a posting provider. Those are submitted to DMV annually for approval. DMV signs off on that, but DMV also can intake those requests directly. And that would be outside of that subscriber list that ADS would have visibility into. So this goes into public records policies and public records processes, and each one of the departments under state law manages their records under their own approach, but they have to adhere to state law, which is provide the record.
Right, I understand that it's similar to municipalities. And so this data is specifically required by federal law.
It is.
And so does federal law also specify the subscribers, the folks who are,
I'm not sure.
okay, because I'm just thinking that might be something. So I would just like to know more about that. And I think it's important that we know what we're paying, Tyler.
We do. The report itself is confidential, and my legal team is working with theirs on what we can release.
The amount is confidential?
We know the amount total. I've testified to it. The
Okay.
amount with 160,000 web pages and a whole list of transactions annually right now is about 3.6 million for the entire web interface and structure under state of Vermont.
Okay, so that's what we pay. I just want to be clear that I
That is what
understand.
they,
That's
that
just
is what they
pay.
retain for fees. That is part of the self-funded web portal.
Okay, 3.6 million is what we pay to Tyler Tech for hosting the website. Just is that accurate?
Post, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they do quite a few more things, but that's the basics.
Okay, but what a typical website hoster would do, I mean,
Mhm.
transactions.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And so that also right now includes PCI compliance, which PCI just updated to 4.0, which requires quarterly auditing. They're doing that auditing on the state's behalf. If we were to take that on, we would actually require some additional staff
Okay,
and resources that the state doesn't have today.
but that's typically what those folks do. That type of-
Not typically. We definitely have a really great offer in current form.
Okay, so that's something that we'll talk about more in our committee because
So the second,
Sorry, Rep. Sibilia? Sorry.
that's okay.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on like a basic level. So DMV, you're providing your name and your address,
A driver record.
right? And so Vermonters, when they provide that, have no means of protecting that, of maintaining their privacy. Like, there's no way to stop that from being
It's not
shared.
considered, right, driving is considered a privilege, I guess. I don't know if those would be my words necessarily, but they do sign off on knowing that that data has to be provided under federal law.
Okay, and so then I just want to say out loud something I'm kind of puzzling with, which is some of the work that I've done with telecommunications and public records law for our for-profit companies, which are able to maintain a lot of their information confidentially to protect their ability to make a profit. But Vermonters with federal law are not able to protect who knows where they live and what their name is together. That's the current federal law.
Under DPPA, yes. Under public records law in the state, yes. You are correct.
So we also have the ability to protect Vermonters. So in theory, we could do something about that.
Yes, legislature can absolutely do something about that.
Thank you.
I think Rep. Bailey was first.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether you told your department told us this or DMV told us this, but getting that information in onesie twosie was free from DMV versus
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I believe that's my memory as well.
so when you buy it in bulk, you have to pay a fee. Okay, and could you tell me what PCI is again? The acronym.
It's the purchase. It's basically the credit card.
So when you,
transaction fee.
if I may, because I use my,
Senator Major?
yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So whenever there's a transaction, your full credit card number cannot be accessed or any of that information. Once the transaction is completed, it immediately deletes it except for the last four numbers of that. So, if say you make a purchase, a subscription purchase, once that subscription purchase is done, even the company that is it cannot see what that your credit card number is or any information concerning it.
Right, they're not supposed to.
They're not supposed to.
That's why an audit,
Yes.
a quarterly
And-
audit is a good model.
And it's illegal for them to do that.
Correct.
They're not supposed to. I'm sorry.
No, you're correct.
And just the one other follow up on Tyler, we don't actually pay them. They just take it's a transactional fee from the transaction. That we're not.
I believe that's the process, yes.
So my particular concern is once the recipient receives the information from Tyler, what's to prevent that recipient from selling it down the line without anyone's knowledge? That's my concern.
And that would be any bit of information and record that we're talking about.
But I just, there's no checks or balance on how far that information goes.
Correct. So the second place that is part of this process would be limited criminal history records. So you think of background check requirements. Those also are both, there's not a subscriber list, but you can imagine that the volume of requests is significantly high because anytime somebody's doing a background check, that's going to be asked for. That I understand is in incremental requests as well as in volume requests. And because of the high volume that is also done automated through this system. So those are also required documents. Those are also considered public records. It's considered public record.
And Chair Senator Harrison.
Yeah, Senator.
Sorry, just to clarify again, because
Take notes. Yep.
So is that DMV records specifically?
No, these would be public safety records.
Public safety records. And so that, is that like court records? Or what is public safety record?
It limited criminal background check information. That's how it's categorized as. So I'm assuming that the sheriff's departments would receive these requests based on what they have. It's not directly through the courts. My understanding is that the named department for this particular process is public safety.
So how did that, so these are official criminal records? Okay.
Yeah. So when you look at volunteers at schools, need to have a background
Right.
check. That information is required. People in particular lines of work where it's a requirement.
Bus drivers need 7 different background checks. We found out. We're
If
working
anybody
on
who
that.
has access to CJI, which is criminal justice information
Yeah.
data, they would need to have a more extensive background check. So all that information is part of that. Those are requested in bulk. Those are required to be provided. And that is another scenario. And each of these individual scenarios still follows that core public records law that we have in the state too.
All right. And that's information that the people don't themselves enter into the system. It's entered by someone else.
Correct.
Okay, I'm sorry. Rep Campbell.
Yeah, thanks. Secretary Riley Hughes, you said that information is required to be released.
Yes.
And is that required by Vermont's Public Records Act?
It ties back to the Public Records Act, yes. And I believe that there are some criminal history policies out there that I just have, it's not associated with the web portal board on what that is specifically. So I've been doing some research and I don't want to misstate and state the wrong one.
Okay,
But anyway, it's not federal, it's state law.
No, there's a federal requirement to it as well.
Oh, there is.
Mhm.
Okay. And right now we have no restriction on, again, resale or resharing that information.
We have no restriction beyond what they've determined to be limited. I don't have the terms of what would be considered limited because ADS isn't providing this data.
Okay.
so we've got these.
And that is in agreement with Tyler, or is that?
They are doing the automation of those requests, but it's governed in the same way that we talked about with DMV, where I believe that DPS is the named agency there. And then there's a transaction fee associated with that information when it's requested.
But when you said limited, you mean limited by whom?
Limited by the content. I don't think
I couldn't hear you,
it's
sorry.
by the content. I don't think it's a deep criminal record check. It is a limited criminal record check. So there's restrictions on the information, and I apologize. I'm just not an expert on the public.
Okay, so the limit is on the types of
Criminal
information that can be provided. The
Right.
limit is on the types of information that can be provided, not on what you can do with the information. Okay,
Correct.
got it. Thank you.
But if somebody's name is on there, somebody's name is on there. So an individual would be identified based on that information.
Okay,
Thanks.
so in both cases, we've got these 2 broad buckets where we know for sure that info is being broadly shared per federal law. So it's driver records and criminal history records. And in both cases, the information is passing through Tyler Tech as our web host. They're retaining their fee, their transaction fee, if their little portion of it. And then it goes on to the receiver or the end user. And one area that we should probably take a look at and see what influence we might be able to have is then whether that data can be resold by the Hartford or by
And as far as resold too, there's also a consideration around retention. So
Okay,
if somebody is a recipient of that information and it originates in the state of Vermont, I think there needs to be a consideration on how long they're allowed to retain it and what the destruction policy of that information should be.
and that that's something that is currently addressed in the contract with Tyler?
It is not. Because
I guess what I meant is that where it should be, where do we put this?
my recommendation is that we look at some of the public records laws in the state of Vermont first.
Okay,
And that would be an easy umbrella to then start applying more consistently across everywhere.
okay. That was what I needed to know. Where do we pull the lever? Okay, Rep. Southworth, I'm losing track of the hands. Senator Plunkett was first in line.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure if this is what the secretary's talking about, but I'm fairly familiar with criminal history records. And in Title 20, there's chapter on the Vermont Crime Information Center, and I believe that's where it's disseminated from. And Chapter 117 has a number of different sections that specify who can get it, how much of it they can get, what the penalties are for disseminating beyond that. So that's fairly well spelled out in statute, which sounded different from what the secretary was.
Okay, so we need to look into that, sounds like. And it sounds like then they're different than there may be a similar flow, but it sounds like the criminal history and the driver's records are different. Okay, Rep. Sebelia?
So I apologize if this question's been answered and I missed it. Does Tyler get to keep this data? But it's
not their
public data, so
It's public, they don't keep the data.
how do we know?
We'll call it contracting. We have very limited location of where they're actually housing the state's data. We have a lot of that data sitting within our systems. And so they will do transmission of data, but they don't actually do retention of data. And that's explicitly called out in the contract.
And so that is interesting to me to think about, because if this is public data that we're required to share, so it's only through the contract that they're not getting it. Are they getting it on? That seems very odd to me. And the reason I'm thinking about this is just thinking about the notion of we're selling data, and that's not technically what is happening here. We are sharing data, and
Well,
Tyler,
we're intaking revenue for it. So in the case of DMV, they are intaking revenue for it because there's a fee associated with requesting that information, and you would apply that. So my agency has had to charge for public records requests because the sheer volume, time, and effort that it's going to take to fulfill the requester's ask. And then going through the redaction of if there's any information in there. And many times we can't redact staff information. So the name of the individuals who worked on the project, any information about them that wouldn't be considered personnel records. And so there's still that exposure to a Vermonter's information. But we have to follow public records. And so we are taking that money, and I mean, we're talking maybe $100. So in the definitions that have been provided, one could look at that and say that's data sales. And so we could be selling data. So now the scope really increases, and who is managing and handling, what is Basara doing? So Basara is managing all the state's archive records, what libraries do. And so the request itself really starts growing legs. But what I would tell you is the state, nor Tyler, is in the business of selling data. We're not in the business of selling records. It's not a viable method of identifying source of funding for IT. It wouldn't be something that the administration would recommend as a source of funding for IT either. And I think putting some guardrails around what's allowed and what's not allowed is important.
So I just want to ask. See if I can have some clarity about the administration's position on this. I mean, does the administration have a position that we should be protecting Vermonters' data that we are taking in? And that's a very broad,
It's a broad ask.
broad question.
There is an
Any?
approach that I would say each one of the departments and agencies, including the services that ADS is providing, that we take privacy and security to the utmost level of care and requirements.
So I'm going to push on that for a minute. So I don't think that the administration has, I'm not aware, but I am not aware of the administration coming forward and asking us to do things like what we're talking about right now with the Public Records Act or are there instances that you could point to of the administration asking the legislature to take action to protect Vermonters' data?
So I'm new, right? So I've only been here a little while.
Yes.
Let me find out exactly where
You're
and
doing a
when.
great job.
I'll get back to you.
I think
would-
Rep. Southworth was first.
I would appreciate a
Sure.
follow-up.
Absolutely.
Representative Southworth.
I know that we've been kind of hammering on DMV. One of my inquiries is, are there any other agencies or departments doing something similar? And that's one of the whole asks in that wording is identifying who else does this.
Not that it's done through visibility of my agency.
Okay.
So it's not done through systems. What my data team is in the process of doing right now is putting together a comprehensive data sharing inventory. And that is not under the lens of where are we willy-nilly sharing data. It's really getting a handle on where are we interfacing and connecting with information that resides within the state outside, and what are we doing with ingesting it inside. And so, for example, let's say that the federal government, right? So on the Health and Human Services side, where are the points where we are submitting information automated from our systems to their systems, from our systems to an individual? Where are we sending manual reports? Where are we sending one-time data? And being able to capture that inventory is that starting point that I think that we're talking about here that could even get us to the point to start the conversation around who's doing what. And so that was my ask within Senate institutions, and my ask here within this committee is, if my priority has to shift away from doing some of the work that we've started and move over to providing a report for information with a very small subset focus to it, it is going to make this process a lot longer, which has a much bigger picture approach to it, because it also allows us from a security standpoint to shut it down. So then we know that, for example, on the federal government side, if we were automatically sending information to a federal system that no longer was in use or standing up, yet we were still sending that information, who is keeping the lights on? And who's now receiving that information if we are not intentionally going to look at it? And so we want to know immediately through what we've put in place for some of our security protocol and our alert settings, that we can go in and actually shut it off.
That goes to my downstream, who's getting the information.
Yep.
Thank you.
I want to come back to the inventory that you're working on. We have a lot of hands. So I think in order we're Senator Major, Rep. Sibilia, and Rep. Torrey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're really talking about public information and the organizing of it and thus selling it, but it's public information nevertheless. And so when we're talking about data privacy, I think what things are private and what things are public is really the crux of this and how this is organized and sold. So if in this, I'm less concerned about the organizing if it's public information, but I am concerned about being PCI compliant,
Mhm.
making sure social security numbers are not, those types of things are not being sold, and
Correct.
what are the guardrails around that to making sure that whether it's through court system or whether it's through DMV or anything like that. And then who are those providers
Mhm.
that are doing it as well, that are getting the background checks and things that I know. And I'll take Windsor, for instance. Our Windsor Sheriffs is one of the providers of background checks, but there are a number of companies, and having one guardrails as well as laws around what they can and cannot do.
Correct.
That's my soapbox for.
And Senator Major, if I can add on top of that, when we look at creating the definition of what is data and what is personal or private data, the statute that belongs in aligns more towards the public records
Yeah.
laws and less to the state statute that created the Agency of Digital Services. So 458 is just a technical update to ADS's statute that created the agency and the responsibilities of the agency. So bringing definitions to that statute is out of place. Those definitions really belong in a more comprehensive law.
Because anyone, I mean, can go in manually to DMV and ask for, or go into a sheriff's office or and ask for X amount, or go into a city hall and ask for. So I think what you're saying is absolutely correct.
Representative Sibilia?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying, Secretary Riley Hughes. So the request that we made with our partners in Senate institutions, I think what I heard you say is that is narrower than the work that you are doing, and focusing on that will slow down the other work that you are doing. Is that right?
That's one of them. Yes.
Okay, so heard, and I really am a fan, Secretary Riley Hughes, but also we have a job ourselves to do of providing oversight and being able to hold, the checks and balances. And so how would you recommend that we act with urgency and in partnership this year with you on this?
You have another House committee that has taken up S71. It's not being taken up in this committee, which is the current data privacy bill proposed. That has data definitions that contradict what was written in the amendment.
In what amendment?
In the amendment that
Our suggested
the suggested language. So there's going to be conflict and challenge.
So
there.
the current S71 language, which is over here,
Mhm.
which is as amended by Senator Chittenden, I believe. I believe that's the case. So those definitions conflict.
And definitions, the 3303 under section 3 for the creation of ADS, that's not a place for data definitions. It's not the law to put data definitions under, so it's misplaced, was my feedback. The request for the report, yes, I believe that's important, but I want to make sure that we're actually not. I want to understand the intent of the committee, because the way that it's written is a very narrow scope that if it's not tied to what an outcome that we all understand, you're not going to get a report that actually provides you with the information that you're looking for.
So I can speak only for myself. Representative Southworth and I, and then consulted with our chair, moved fairly quickly.
Mhm.
For myself, I want to make sure that we can do our due diligence, and that means gathering information, getting a broader understanding of what we're sharing. So
Representative Torrey?
Yeah, I thought I heard you say that this inventory that's underway is something that you always do for cybersecurity reasons. Like, this is an ongoing type of inventory.
We have, so I just created some breadth to the data and AI division. so that we have some resources now that can look around what is the governance model, and are we allowing individual governance approaches to digital data, or are we starting with a base foundation? So we've got a base foundation established by ADS that the other agencies would have to adhere to. Accessibility is another aspect of that too. So in being able to be accessible compliant, you're talking about digital data, but you're also talking about how we've given access to that digital data. The data governance framework, like I was saying, being able to do work around where we're compliant in that framework and where we're not compliant in that framework. And so some of that information that is being asked for in the language would be derived from those validations and from those assessments. Prior to this team being consolidated, that had not happened. So everything that I'm describing was not work that we were actively doing that we have to do now. And so that's why I'm saying they really just started it, which they're doing an immensely great job, but also this does fall under that veil of cyber and security and restricted information. And so the opportunity to have what we talked about around executive sessions so that some of the details can be shared more broadly with the committee that doesn't put state systems or state data at risk is important. What we have accepted 10 years ago isn't something we necessarily can take a risk on today because of the vast availability of the data. One of the things that we haven't talked about either is any restrictions around who outside of the United States can request that data. And right now there's no restrictions around that. We provide public information globally, which just in the sense of how our laws have not adapted to modern technologies, that in itself puts Vermonters information.
Who was next in the queue? Where were we?
Senator,
We had Senator Major?
Senator Harris.
Yeah,
Harrison?
I was, it's very complex and we're kind of having to
Yeah.
redo the plane while we fly it, right? And it's just, the definitions, when you pointed that out, that there are just different definitions in S71, that's very true. And that doesn't make sense. And S71 may change, it likely will change. So we need to be really careful on those definitions in S71 and come to a place where we agree on the definitions, staff as well as, or the administration as well as legislators. So that's going to be a challenge. But we really need an overall structure and maybe set of values. And I think the values is where the legislature comes in. You know, we don't want our data being sold, right? Unless we have to. So that might be something, and I don't know if there is any such list or statement of intent in the documents that you have, or hopefully there is somewhere.
In the two that we've talked about, there are there's contract language and there's restricted language in there around that I will make sure both committees have. Those are the two that are built into a process that is known. And I just want to be clear too, that agencies and departments aren't willy-nilly just selling data.
Yeah.
We're not providing, right?
And I
So-
appreciate you saying that, though.
Yeah, we're not.
Yeah.
That's not happening. And even through starting this conversation too, we have an opportunity to have some deeper conversations with the web portal board as well. And we're going to have some recommendations coming into next session to change the language that created the web portal board. That was 18 years ago. And we're no longer doing the same things that board was set up to do. And it needs to operate differently.
Great. And then if I can just follow up one other thing is, and then we need to translate all of that into language that we can share with the public so that so the public knows what
Correct.
our highest level policies are and intent.
Correct. And some of that's happening in the accessibility compliance space. They've initiated records retention policy enforcement across systems that ADS is managing. So that's in conjunction with our security team, our data team, and Vasara. And so being able to have those internal gut checks are really important, and making sure that across the state that we're operating consistently, but also not, when somebody says the grandfather clause, red flags go up for me, because that means that we've got risk. That just increases the risk. And so we've got to stop doing that. And that should hopefully down the line start informing this committee, your committee, on where we need to make some investments for replacement. But cleaning up things internally first, I think is going to be in our best interest.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Question. I don't have a question.
I have a thought that hasn't coalesced yet. So here's my thought. Talking on the fly, never a good idea. So what I'm sensing is that we all need to continue to do our homework to understand what language guides data sales and sharing wherever that lives. So it sounds like some's in the Public Records Act, some's in the Tyler Tech contract. We have policies. So what do we have in place right now, and where does it all live? It sounds like it's living in different places to me, which is maybe why it's been harder for us to kind of get a handle on.
It is.
Then the second thing is, then we need to get the information we need, because it sounds like we have work we need to do next session. And we all know now how quickly the session can go by if we've got stuff we want to get done by crossover.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to come in like ready to go. And so it sounds to me that one, it'll be important, I think, for the House and Senate to stay coordinated. Maybe we can introduce companion language. Then the inventory is really important. So if the suggested language in the suggested amendment is not the right language, I definitely don't want to bog down in conflicting definitions that are in S71 and that are in our thing. I'm not sure how much any of that even matters right now. I'm curious to know whether we need revised language that we try to pass out in H458 this year, or whether the inventory you're doing is the info we need. If so, how do we get it? When is it due? When, like, we would need to see it before the session. And we talked about with H458, why do we even need to do this at all? Why do we even need to pass a bill? We're doing this work. We'll get it to you. And I think that can be fine. Or sometimes we want to get something into language, just because if we all walk out of the building right now and we're all simultaneously hit by a truck.
Wow.
I know.
Okay, so start it off.
I like the
Do it.
velocity.
Yeah.
The velocity makes it a little better.
Yeah. So, it's like, how do we know that whoever's here in January
Right.
has the information that they need? So what do you recommend? Tell me a little bit more about the inventory and when it's due. It sounds like it's a really broad report on every state department and agency that shares or sells data in any way with anybody. Sounds great.
And selling it it's not about selling it. It is about providing it. So whether that providing is sales, whether or not it's emailed, whether or not it's an automated report, whether or not it's a requested report, whether or not it's system to system connectivity, everything is comprehensive. My recommendation was very similar to what Nuari provided to you around the tabletop. Is two of these committee members are JITOC members, and I believe that it's possible that, is there somebody on Senate institutions that's part of JITOC?
Yeah.
That we look at possibly having a very similar executive session in JITOC, which would provide a level of informing to both committees between now and next session, that will give you where we are identifying data, compliant data, restricted data, what the user privileged access policies are that we're putting in place, that we have in place today, And the things that we're doing, and the reason why I suggest executive session is that this does create cyber risk to the state if we were to willy-nilly just share this information and
What information?
this inventory, the details behind the inventory, where we're collecting that information in the process. Because if we share it openly, this now is like a hijack opportunity. And anybody in the entire globe watches YouTube.
Okay, so this isn't like a 300-page report.
No.
That's gonna be
No,
publicly printed out and
No,
delivered.
No.
Perhaps Amelia?
I mean, is there some language that you could propose to us for this year about what you're doing that would allow us to be doing our job in partnership with you?
let me look at the specificity around what it states for the reports of each division and see if I can include some things. Right now, the data and AI division sends over the AI inventory. Let me just make sure that I understand.
And you understand my question. So you're saying to us, we are undertaking a lot of this work.
Mhm.
And so I'm saying to you, okay, then can you tell us what it is that you're doing? Can we put that in, that we're going to hear from you about that work in order to do our job?
I think what you're
Four
saying,
58 isn't the place where, unless we issue that as a part of the regular requirement.
it could be session law, right? Can't we
It
just,
could definitely be.
and we've
session.
got like a vehicle, so I think what we're saying is there anything we could stick into 458 that you suggest? I don't think anybody here is hung up on the language.
Let me go back.
That could be
and see.
not altering your underlying
Right.
directive statute, but just session law that says, and by the way, here's a topic of great interest and here's what we could deliver to you guys on December 15th.
Here's a word too.
Yeah.
And, and allows us to say, okay, you said this is what you're doing. We put in session law that you were going to come back and tell us what you were doing. I mean,
I don't think we're hung up on the draft language you wrote, are we? It's more,
for me, I am hung up on acting with
I sense your
urgency
hang
and
up.
collaboration.
No, I hear you.
If I get hit by the bus, is what you're saying.
Right.
No, you were in the line.
I'm sorry about the butts. Yeah.
Don't get hit by a bus.
A semi, all right?
Sorry about the butts.
Let me go back and
Okay, because I think we're all committed to, I don't want to put you on the spot. I think we're hoping to get 458 across the finish line this year. So the question is, can we add a couple of, can we add something here that everybody's okay with, that gets us what we need and that doesn't,
maintains the integrity of the original statute and
And that
Yeah.
has us doing our job.
understood.
we
Yeah.
understand.
And being responsible to the public.
Yeah.
I'll just keep saying.
Yeah.
But you don't need to keep saying it.
I
You
might
made your
though.
point.
I
Yeah,
might though.
I don't
Yeah.
disagree with your point. I sense a.
I'm really good at that.
Okay, I sense an escalation.
Yes.
Okay, so this has been great. Next,
Yes.
I don't know if I have anything.
I think it's been very helpful
we've covered.
us.
okay.
Thank you.
So Representative Seaforth, and then we can summarize or see if anybody has final
And I think
questions. And Rep
Rep.
Campbell.
Campbell too.
Okay,
I just want to make sure that 458 is going to be the vehicle for what we're trying to do instead of going to S71 and doing something with that.
I
So I
think
just wanna
that
make sure that-
S71 would be a very bad vehicle for this.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's all. I just wanted to make
Yeah,
sure. that we're
my point in that was if it is creating definitions of data
Right.
and then you have another place where you have definitions of data and they conflict and they're not the same, then
Okay.
there you've got a challenge.
Yeah,
All right.
I mean,
I
we
think
can-
458 is the place for some session law thing because it's a nice, clean. It's on a train track.
So my question was just to clarify that Secretary Riley Hughes, you mentioned that there are two places where data is sold or shared, DMV and public safety, and that's it? Is that correct?
That's it that we are aware of, yes.
Okay.
I hate saying that we are aware of, but there's no other vehicle that ADS has put in place to enable that, nor is there any other visibility that we have to validate that it's happening elsewhere. It is not happening elsewhere that we're seeing. With that?
It was definitive.
That we're seeing, right? And so
So if individual departments or agencies do something, you wouldn't be aware of that.
I wouldn't have visibility into it now.
Okay.
And if an individual was doing that, unless it triggered a security policy that showed that they were downloading a bunch of data to a hard drive and we shut their system access off immediately, which by the way, we have policies like that in place. We are putting as many guardrails and safeguards in place to prevent that from happening. But the bad guys can always be a little ahead of the good guys.
So I think what I'm sorry, Rep. Southworth, I'll get this, I mean, Rep. Howland, I'll get this thought out and then you. So I think what I'm hearing is that there could be individual departments or agencies that are kind of off selling their data that EDS doesn't know about. But
I can't see that happening. I have review into every single contract. I am signing contracts that are not IT, that are purely data. So when you look at transportation of individuals in state custody and we have to hire a third-party company to be a taxi service to drive them from point A to point B, I am seeing those contracts and so is my staff. And there's no language in those contracts that indicate that there are any sale of data happening.
I think that was my question, just to make sure I understood that when you say beyond ADS visibility, I don't know whether that means this many agencies, but there's a ton outside that circle, or whether it's broadly across state government. It would have to be
executive branch and elected offices that I would be a sign off on their contracting.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt but I just want to ask a question
And
before
Representative
you can finish your sentence.
There are certain systems that if my business office was not the one who routed the contracts, or I did not sign it and the contract is 30 years old, those are the outliers that I'm talking about. So if I have staff managing it, then I have some visibility into what's happening. And it is not a regular practice. It's not something that would be considered allowable. It's just a matter of, as we start looking at definitions, we have two, right? So we know of two, and we know that DMV is doing this separately, and they have a number associated with what they're doing separately. I don't have that for BCIC. I don't know what that is because it wouldn't come through. We don't have visibility into vision for those. We will have it in Workday when we launch on the Workday system, but you could see how everything is interchanged. And the reason why data and data privacy is important to us is not just from the personal privacy of runners, but it's also the security of our systems. And so we look at it as very much an interweaved web where everything's related and touching. And it ultimately comes down to enforced security too. So you have, probably speaking to the roundtable, what are the second that you had with Newline?
That's true. A question to follow up. You said you were looking at contracts, and an example was the transportation of incarcerated people. So it's great that it doesn't say that you can sell the data or share the data, but is there standard language in contracts that says you may not share any public info or any information? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we have attachments in there that do create enforced restriction to having access to that data and breach policy.
Great. Thank you.
Representative Torrey and then Campbell.
I was just wondering, in addition to looking at contracts, would revenue lines in the various departments reveal data sales? Like, how hard would it be?
Hard.
Yeah. Maybe not after Workday.
Maybe not after Workday. So in a couple of years, we'll have a lot more visibility and transparency in that space.
So what I was getting at is I wonder if it would be appropriate to clarify in statute that no agency or department would be sharing or selling data without some sort of express authorization or something like that. It's a question.
Good question. So yeah, okay. I'm just trying to take note. Yeah, I'm sure you guys can all hear me typing. I'm trying to take notes on so we all understand what our next steps are going to be. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
No.
Representative Howland and then Bailey.
All the data that's in the Secretary of State's office, from elections to professional registrations, that data is not controlled by ADS.
We have visibility into the contracts, but no, each agency and department owns their data. We're just the custodian.
And so it's bulk access versus sale. I mean, and that's all just public records access.
Okay. Good. So I think, oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. So for clarification purposes, you're saying we should clean up or add to the public record rather than have them partially here in this possible law or over there.
I definitely say that 3303 is not a place for it. Correct. I'm not legal counsel, but it looks like we have some. I do think that it would be in the interest of both committees to look at what our current public records laws are, because that is a top level requirement. And it may be one of those things that somebody says, nope, not even an option. You can't do that. But there's FOIA and there's Vermont Public Records law, and there's some variation and there's some difference. And I'm not sure the last time an amendment happened there to look at the digital age and how technology has enhanced and grown the access to information. But I would recommend the committees look at that first.
And we have taken actually decent amount of, not an extensive amount, but we walked through the Public Records Act with Tucker from Ledge Council. We heard from municipalities, we've heard from the Secretary of State, we've heard from DMV, we heard from Judiciary. I mean, we've been doing some homework to try to get ready. We've taken a decent amount of testimony, and I just feel like with each meeting we have, we get one, we move the ball like
A little bit.
yeah, like half a yard. I'm feeling a little bit of a, it's a little bit of a grind because it's complicated, and there are a lot of things that are intersecting here. I
And
think.
there's a lot of dependencies as well. And
Yeah.
I know when it comes to the data that we're handling, looking at federal compliances and state law, a lot of the time it goes up to that public records piece and how we're applying configurations and access policies for users, for departments, going back to, who has the appropriate background checks and did we track that to even have access to that data? It is extremely complicated.
Yeah.
And so you can have a legal lens to it, or you can have a security or technical lens to it, and come out with different perspectives in the end. But our responsibility is to secure, restrict, and manage and maintain the data. It is not our responsibility to own the data. And it is not our authority to sell it either or provide it.
I mean, on our side alone, we're going to have to work with GovOps, Judiciary, and Commerce. That's just us. Rep. Torrey?
I thought of this question yesterday when we were doing our cybersecurity, but I didn't get to ask and realize you're a good person to ask it. And that's just, is there any best practices or anything around preventing the unnecessary collection of data? Like, it seems like having lean data is also a security. It seems like it links in. And I'm just wondering, how does that get operationalized? Is that something that happens with programming and, it's kind of a big question,
Yeah.
but
So you can follow a risk assessment model for it. Looking at the compliances, looking at the risk versus reward on certain things. Putting everything in one place doesn't necessarily make it more secure. So we take it from a privileged access standpoint, and we look at least privileged access. So we do that from the user right up to the administrator. If you're an administrator, at minimum, what do you need access to? But that doesn't mean that you get access to the maximum, because that puts data and data access at risk. And being able to not only configure and assign those policies, but always validate the enforcement of those policies too. And we're really getting there. We've made an immense amount of progress since bringing our CISO on board that has resulted in some pretty positive changes for the state around securing systems, user access, and there's a lot more to come.
So I think, unless I've forgotten something, I think, our short-term homework is to see if there's something you could suggest, that we could tuck into 458 on this Senate side.
I will, gonna go back to the office today.
Great.
See if I can provide something before the end of the day today.
Thank you. I think that, I think we're all pretty committed to getting H458 off to the gov. It would be a shame to not get that underlying bill
I agree.
done. So I think we all agree. And I think it's so helpful to have our Senate colleagues here. I continue to, be an advocate of a unicameral legislature.
I've been thinking that too.
That'd be a pretty big bill.
My home state, Nebraska is the only unicameral legislature in the country.
Nonpartisan.
Yes, it's nonpartisan.
I do have to say, I support that. In the last two addresses that the governor made, he said in order to make the change that's necessary for Vermonters in the state of Vermont, we have to work together, and it's going to take bravery, right, and courage. And in order to do that, we have to be brave together. And that was like so coincidental. But I think be brave together, and I think that's what we're doing here. So I do appreciate the collaboration, and we'll get something to you.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask, do you want me to send it to everybody who is in this room?
Sure.
Okay. That
And,
makes it
and
easy.
so our members who aren't in this room, but.
Right,
both-
so
both-
you
both
send it to both committee
both
members.
committees, yeah.
I can do some.
And me.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And our lunch.
Everyone in the room.
Fearless committee.
And to our fearless attorney.
Yeah, you should
All
have to
right.
pay for it.
Yeah. All right, thanks so much. We can go off live. We are adjourned.